Hello and welcome back to the Scale Ups and Hypergrowth podcast with me, Marcus Cauchi. Today, it's an absolute pleasure to have the VP for Customer and Market Insights from Salesforce, Karen Mangia. Karen, welcome.
Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here. And it looks like we've got a full house today based on the audience behind you.
Absolutely, Statler and Waldorf are what I model the podcast on. So it's two grizzled old veterans. Well, at least one of us is old, having a good go at the fatted calves in our industry. So, Karen, would you mind giving a 60 to 90-second run through of your career so far, please?
My true North Star in my career has always been about spending time with customers. And I started in project management at AT&T, the big company, moved into sales, over time into sales leadership. And I think for me, one of the great discoveries of my career is that I could experience all of the joys of spending time with customers, learning about their businesses and helping solve problems. And I could do that in the context of not always needing to carry a quota. So for me, discovering the wide and wonderful world of partner experience and customer experience was fantastic. And it took kind of my love of being with customers and solving problems and storytelling and package that together into one experience. So over time, I've been at three big tech companies, AT&T, Cisco, and now Salesforce. And what I have loved about that is just the opportunity to experience how engaging with customers can be so dynamic and what happens when businesses truly can take ego out of the conversation, listen to customers, and really drive change. And then beyond that, I spend, I think, the rest of my time either dreaming that I could be an Anthony Bourdain-like person or just cooking, eating, and while I'm cooking and eating, thinking about what I could cook and eat next.
Well, with an Italian name and the hand gestures, I think you're halfway there.
I feel good about it. Maybe this is my moment where I get discovered and launch my Food Network career. I have no idea.
Fabulous. Okay, so you said it's wonderful when companies can get their ego out of the way of the customer. Have you ever been blindsided because you've been working on a deal with a customer and someone's ego just wouldn't get out of the way?
Yes. And I see this happen so many times with things like surveys or companies that are trying to figure out how to bring some kind of new product to market for their customers. And I'll never forget the time when I got this mysterious LinkedIn message. I'm sure you're on the receiving end of lots of these. Someone contacts you with their dilemma. They're looking for support. And there was something so compelling about this woman's message from halfway around the world. I felt like I had to respond. It said this: I see that you are an expert in customer experience. I'm in a high potential talent program at my company, and I'm working on Voice of the Customer as my project for this program. I did all of my research. I just gave a presentation to our executive team, and it was a disaster. I need help. What did I do wrong, and how do I correct? And I thought, I must respond to this cry for help. Right. And as I'm having this conversation with this unknown woman who I somehow felt this kinship with, I saw myself in her circumstances as I got to know her because she had done all the right things, right? She heard executives give her this charter that said, we're losing market share. Mm-hmm. We're struggling with customer retention. We need something new. And what we want you to do, high potential person, is go talk to customers about this new product that we think will just save the day. I mean, this will be brilliant, right? We've all been in this spot.
The magic bullet.
The silver bullet. Well, all right. So she goes off to do what she's supposed to do, which is check in with customers to see, do they view this as a viable product? And if so, would they be willing to buy it from her company? So she does everything. I mean, she is the model of preparedness, right? Beautiful, articulate slides, not too crowded. She's done some of the pre-socialization meetings. And when she goes in, the meeting is a disaster. And she's essentially delivering the message that customers are saying, we don't see you this way. Like, we do not think of you as someone who would be a leader in this product. And given the state of the business or our relationship at this present moment, we're not willing to take the risk. Like, we're not your early adopters. Well, the executives are all tripping over each other to just torpedo her. You know, it's the kill the messenger at this point. And that's the only thing the executives can agree on, right? Like, we do not like her. And so what happens is, and I see this happen, I've experienced it myself. You can have all of the data and facts in the world, but what you're usually missing is the context. And I think that's where ego comes into play. And it's this: there were already people who had been in that room having a conversation and were betting their careers and their chance to build their fiefdom and their silo on bringing that product to market, and had told the CEO, this is the path forward. And now, unbeknownst to her, she was in a situation of using data to undermine someone's kind of power play in politics. And the fact of the matter is, she was right? They end up, the CEO tells her that he made a captain's call at the end. Isn't that like always great? It's like, what are we captaining, the Titanic? I mean, I don't feel good about this, but he says, we're going to cancel the voice of customer program. You're going to get a job in a 4-off corner of the business. And we just think that now checking in with customers is something marketing should do. They end up going forward with the product. It's a disaster. I helped her find another job and she left the company. But I thought, haven't we all been there? I mean, you have this compelling data. You've checked in with everyone. You've done all the right things. And then you get in the room and they're like, captain's call. All the data is wrong. We are right. Goodbye.
Last night I was listening to a TED talk on why so many incompetent men become leaders by Thomas Chamorro Premucci. He's an Argentinian academic who studies, he's a sociologist, I think, and he studies essentially idiots. And he said, I'm Argentinian, and the best investment you could possibly make is buy an Argentinian for what he's worth and sell him for what he thinks he's worth. And you see this kind of thing happen a lot. I remember, it must have been about 10 years ago, a famous German sports car manufacturer did the voice of the customer, and what they got back was not really what they wanted to hear, because the customer and the market determine what your brand stands for. You don't. And if you don't listen to the voice of the customer, then you can be way off base. A pal of mine, Martin Lucas, works with a number of consumer brands, and the chief marketing officer had it in his head that their brand was an adventurous brand. Anyway, long story short, huge market, China and Hong Kong. And in China and Hong Kong, their customers, who were loyal but weren't buying, saw them as something that you went out to look elegant in the evening, when you went out with your family to be seen in public. And when they recognized this, and they eventually got the CMO's ego out of the way, they increased sales by £67 million in a quarter. So that's the price of ego. So tell me, what are the 4 most common questions you get asked about finding the voice of the customer?
Well, the 4 of the most common questions I get asked, first of all, is how do we benchmark these net promoter scores against someone else? Which we can dive into that very meaty topic. Yeah. The second one is, what do I do with this information? Right? No one will look at you and say, this is ridiculous. We should not ask our customers for feedback. Lots of people, especially executives who are well-intentioned and want to do something with the feedback, will listen to these survey results or focus group results and go, there, that was nice. I do not know what we do with this. It's lovely to know. Good pulse check. Thanks so much for the update. What do we do with this?
Pat on the head.
Yeah, pat on the head. There. Well done. You get a gold star, a cookie from the break room, maybe. Next is, how do we set up a successful customer advisory board? People often get this wrong. They think that the purpose of a customer advisory board is for your executives to spend hours on end delivering PowerPoints to the C-suite of your most influential customers.
Really?
That is not actually advice getting. That is delivering PowerPoints. It's called education. And it's often quite boring, not very engaging. And the last piece is, how do we build one team aligned around the customer, right? How do we connect all this customer feedback and get this single magical view of our customers, where we're able to not only predict the future, every decision they're going to make, but also how we retain them?
Okay, so which one to pick first? Because there's quite a lot of meat in there. Net Promoter Score. Let's with that.
Talk about Net Promoter Score. So That question, right? How likely are you to recommend us to a friend or colleague? Question that typically comes right after that is why or why not? And here's the reality of that question. I mean, I think when it was created, that was an important benchmark. We didn't have anything at the point in time that came out. And so at the moment, that was a fresh new question and a wonderful way to get a perspective. The reality is asking someone how likely they are to do something is the equivalent of me asking you right now, how likely are you to floss your teeth? How likely are you to eat vegetables? The reality is that's all about intention, and that sounds great. But presented with the vegetables or the chocolates, which one do you actually choose?
Oh, the
So
vegetables.
at this point in time, right, I think a much better question is, did you recommend us to whom and why or why not? Because I don't want to know from customers what they intend to do. I want to know what they're actually doing and how that benefits the brand. And by the way, I'd like to follow up with the people that they actually recommended us to, not that they intend to get to at some point in the future.
Well, you've touched on the subject very close to my heart. Very often you'll go to a hotel and then you get those awful surveys afterwards. What was the shower cap like? What was check-in, check-out like, food and whatever. But, you could have been stuck on a corner room next to the lift, the elevator, and by the ice machine, overlooking the pool on a Friday night when there was a stag do on. And what you really want to talk to them about is soundproofing. And they don't ask you questions that actually encourage you to give your opinion. They ask you questions that will apparently give you the self-serving answers, or they lack imagination. And the other thing is that once you've done the survey, there's no feedback, so that you don't get told how they've acted upon it. And I think a lot of sales organizations fall massively short, because when they sell to a customer, what they do not do, and I don't understand why they don't do this, is they don't establish the benchmarks against which the customer will hold them to account. And they don't tee up a cadence of regular contact where they can go in front of the customer and hold each other to account. Because I think as sales is evolving, what we're really moving towards, if you're being smart about selling, is you need to create a partnership where you help each other get better. And I know Salesforce has done this very well. You look at companies like Thycotic, Outreach, OutSystems, UiPath. All these businesses are constantly having customers critically feedback and hold each other to account. Why is it so few companies have the courage to do that? Because where they do, and then they act on that information, they develop fabulous product that customers want to buy, and they earn their investment, they earn their loyalty, and they earn their faith.
You're bringing up such a great point. It's not just about who you ask for feedback, whether that's the hotel example or in a B2B organization. It's also about when you ask and who follows up. So kind of breaking that down, a great example, Marriott in the hotel industry discovered that asking a guest these survey questions after the fact did not enable them to address the guest issue or perception. And so if you've noticed, remember when we used to go to hotels and check into those that long ago point in time? Well, what happens, right? Just a distant memory on the horizon.
I had hair.
Yeah. I was tall. So, they changed it so that when you would log in to get your Wi-Fi access, it would pop up the survey with basically a couple of questions about how your stay is going right at that moment. And if you wrote a comment in there or gave a low score, it was part of a daily stand-up meeting with that property manager and team. And they would contact you and say, we heard you have a noisy room. Could we address the source of the noise, or could we move you to another room? And what they found was they ended up with much higher guest loyalty and satisfaction and return rate when they could ask during the stay, intercept the issue, and take a meaningful action to address it, rather than asking when they can no longer do anything. If you had cold water in your room, or that rattling radiator noise that's so pervasive when you've flown halfway around the world and can't sleep. I'm sure you've been there.
Yep.
But then I think what happens in bigger companies, in kind of the sales organization, and when we're talking about this B2B world, is a couple of things. First, you tend to have different people doing pre-sales, then implementation, then post-sales and ongoing support. And like most people, I mean, this is normal. I've been in sales and sales leadership. I've been there. I mean, you pay attention to what you're getting paid for. So if your job is to sell something, right, you're in pre-sales, that moment where you get paid and the moment where you're told you've met your goal is the moment you sign the contract. You no longer have this vested interest in anything that happens after that point in time. If you're in the implementation phase, for a lot of companies, that might involve another partner or whatever that might look like in your business. It's someone else, and success looks totally different to them. And then there tends to be someone in this relationship oriented, you could call it the farmer salesperson, the customer success manager, that ends up with this customer that feels like they've done the equivalent of building a house. And it ended up taking, more time, more effort, and more money than they expected. But now the team that established that business case is long gone. And it's, something that Salesforce candidly that we've invested some time to address, because what we realized was we have to have people who are the keepers of the business case. So when you show up and you look that CIO or that CFO or that CEO in the eye and say, here's the ROI, this is what we're going to deliver, this is what success looks like, that post-implementation, someone sees that through, to your point, and then goes back and checks in and says, is this still what success looks like? Are we on pace? Relative to the benchmarks for other companies that are like you, here's where you should be. Here's how we can close the gaps. Here's where you're ahead of schedule. And I think that's the part that it takes figuring out whose responsibility that is to carry that pre-sales business case and promise into that post-sales world and ongoing relationship experience.
Well, in this current economic climate, the single most important focus, I think, has to be on keeping customers. There's always been this push for new business, and that's where the glamour is. The profit is in keeping customers, and that's why initial investment, that's critical. But unless they're loyal, and there are plenty of people who are loyal to brands, but they're not spending because you're not listening to them, and they've lost faith in you. And so often, companies miss that because they're fixated on their great new idea, just like the example that you cited. And what flabbergasts me is that the evidence is there, but the results are not. And you see this time and again. I interviewed our mutual friend, Roderick Jefferson. He says hi, by the way. And he was really fascinating when he was saying that, look, you have to have conversations with people. Don't go there to pitch. Don't go there to sell. Stop all of that. What people want, and again, this is borne out by the work that Mark Goulston does. He says all human beings want to be heard, to feel felt, and to be understood. When someone knows that you feel what they feel, and they feel genuinely interested, your attention has been actually focused on them. You pay attention. It's a currency. And very few organizations really get to grips with that because they're so focused on themselves. And I think one of the most impressive initiatives that I've ever come across is the city of Helsingborg in Sweden. They've developed a program. I interviewed a guy called Patrick Lindqvist, who's the chief innovation officer there. And he has a task, which is to turn them into a center of innovation excellence in Europe by 2022. And the innovation that he created, which I think is just genius, is he has managers of the gap. Their function is to manage the bridge between the different silos and the different departments to make sure things don't fall through the cracks. And that continuity, because from the customer's point, they don't really care who it is who's speaking to them. At that point, they are the company. So how come, again, given that we know that these silos and fiefdoms actually end up losing you customers and how critical keeping customers is, how come we still in an era where those silos and fiefdoms are allowed to exist?
Well, I think these are the kinds of times, right, when there's some kind of constraint that people get a little bit, a combination of more focused on where the breakdowns and those experiences occur, and are also more willing to work together to solve them. let's face it, when you are making money and you are growing, I mean, they have the saying that sales covers a multitude of evils for a reason. Well, one of the evils that sales covers is gaps in your processes and experiences. And if you can always go acquire more customers, I mean, I would say this all the time as a sales leader, if your team can make their quota 5 minutes from home instead of 50 minutes from home, they will do it. If they can make it selling to one customer instead of 10, they will do it. If they can make it selling one product instead of the elusive across your portfolio, they will do it. I mean, human nature is we default to the easiest path, to the path of least resistance. And so what I'm hearing from so many organizations now, especially as I'm meeting with executives, is we have known we have these process gaps or silos. We haven't been willing to solve them in the past. People haven't been in a state of cooperation to work together to solve those things. I mean, they tend to be unglamorous. They tend to be hard work. It ends with somebody needing to make a decision about who owns what. And what I'm hearing so many executives at companies I work with say is people now have an appetite to work together. There's much more sense of we are all in this together to save our business or save our customer base. And to do that, we can no longer ignore these things that sales used to cover.
I think there's a theme here, which I'm seeing in the companies that have the best levels of engagement throughout their organization, where they are completely focused on the customer and they are incredibly authentic. The rigor around authenticity, you get punished for hiding mistakes and for withholding. You don't get punished for making mistakes. And so, Ray Dalio in his book Principles points to this. Also, they're open to surrendering the outcome or to the outcome. Whatever happens, and they have to accept it. So they're not listening for what they were hoping to hear, and they're not trying to drive towards a specific outcome that is counter to what the customer wants. And the other thing is they're willing to be uncomfortable, and they put themselves in the firing line. They encourage negative feedback and criticism so that they can get ahead of it instead of waiting for the customer to talk with their wallets by closing them and go somewhere else. So again, what's the research that you're seeing, or the research that you've done telling you about the impact of authenticity, about having difficult conversations, about being willing to flex, to appease or to appeal to the customer?
I'm reminded of a conversation that I had when I was doing research for the book Listen Up. And I interviewed a woman named Amy Brown, and she has a business called Authentics. And it's all about the voice of the customer and helping, especially executives at companies, hear from their customers in new ways, and in some cases for the first time. And she describes this process of taking, these different call recordings and snippets of the actual customer's voice. Now, that could be a call center call, a one-on-one interview with the CEO of maybe their most strategic customer. And so she would often get the charter from these senior executives, our customer sat or net promoter scores are dropping. We want you to listen in on these calls and do these interviews so we can figure out who to fire. Somebody's got to be held accountable for this. So she and her team go out and do their magic. And I'll never forget her describing this to me. She goes into this boardroom armed with this readout in the charter of, who's messing this up and who are we going to fire? And she has the data, a couple of very crisp, clear, simple slides. And after she does the first slide with the data, she said, I want to pause to give you an example. And she presses the play button in her slides. And she has about a 2-minute recording that is actually voices from the customers that she's edited together so that the executives sitting in that room can actually hear the customer's frustration or disappointment or, the fear that's coming through. Like, you've left me hanging out here with this business case and I'm accountable for it. And she describes so vividly, like the CEO putting his head in his hands, the CFO taking his glasses off his face and just slamming them on the table. And the chief operating officer slams his hand down on the table and says, no, there's no way a customer is having an experience like that with my company. And what's amazing to me, I mean, I've done this technique myself. I can go out with a team and run a survey that gets thousands of responses and is a representative sample of your business. And if people don't like that data or has news they don't want to hear, as you said earlier, they'll push back, right? Did you survey enough people? Are these really decision makers? Are these our most strategic customers? They will fight the data because they don't like what it says. There's something magical that when an executive has a conversation with one customer or hears 6 voices, that's not a representative sample. Now, she's wisely choosing representative quotes, but it's not a representative sample. People will not fight back on hearing the voice of the customer live that captures their heart. And that, for me, I think is a big turning point. When you were talking about cultures of companies that are really aligned around the customer, I find that those are companies that regularly bring their customers into the business in a variety of ways. Whether that's the executives can pick up the phone and hear on their voicemail every day, 1 minute of customer calls, whether that's customers are regularly present at the employee all hands or town hall meetings. They tend to be better about, putting customers in front of all different types of people so that people can really understand who their customers are and be aligned around that higher sense of purpose of how you're serving them and how that product or service makes a difference for that person or that company.
I interviewed Tom Shodorf for the podcast earlier on this year, and he had a point of speaking to at least 3 customers a week. And I've implemented that with a number of my clients as well. One comes to mind. She's the new CEO. She used to be the CFO of this managed service provider. And she's now speaking to the customers 2 or 3 a week. And what's really fascinating is how much they unburden themselves and how delighted they are to hear from the chief executive, because it's the first time in 17 years that that's ever happened. Mm-hmm. And what they're saying is just golden. They're delighted with the company, but they see them just as, one part of what they're capable of doing. And she's now getting so much useful information. And the salespeople, interestingly enough, were resistant to her speaking to the customers because, well, no, I don't want you talking. No, it's their company accounts. I'm speaking to the customers. And it's proving incredibly powerful. But too often, senior executives want to hear what they want to hear, not what's actually being said. And unless they're actually in that position where they're speaking to the customer themselves and they're getting it firsthand, there will be a lot of resistance if it's because someone's criticizing their ugly baby. So tell me this, what are 3 questions that people should ask but don't?
Well, so we talked a little bit earlier about this whole concept of especially what's happening right now and the importance of asking great questions. And something that I found in organizations that are successful in connecting with customers and hearing them at all levels of the organization, in my estimation, maybe it's my customer research interest and background, those organizations function like amazing qualitative researchers. People ask great questions, they stop to listen to the answers, and they get very curious about what those answers are from the customers. And I think right now, to your point, instead of showing up and trying to sell something to customers, I think asking these 3 questions, I call them the catalyst questions in Listen Up. These 3, how can I help you right now? People will have an answer to that, and it's going to change a lot, right? Businesses are in a very dynamic place. Organizations are in a very dynamic place. Next, what does success look like for you on the other side of this? And that could be the pandemic. That could be their industries in disruption. That could be after an acquisition. There's a myriad of contexts where that makes sense. And the third one is, how can we build your return to growth plan together? Or maybe it's your next, breakthrough. Because I think when you ask people those questions, as opposed to defaulting to, I always say the classic salesperson question to an executive is like, so what is it that keeps you up at night? And I sat with the sales team once that did that. And the CEO said, when I drink too much water. And I thought, well, that wasn't very, how was it? It's probably true. It didn't really help me very much. But I think what we're trying to get to the nature of and what makes for great value-based relationships is being able to ask customers, what is the problem that you're trying to solve right now that you're struggling to solve on your own? And then what role can we play in helping you solve that?
So to build on that, how critical is it that salespeople do their research rather than just turning up to the C-suite? And
oh, yeah. People put so much effort in getting the first meeting, not in the fact that they might not ever get another one after that.
Absolutely.
Only
1 in 7.
That's true. Go ahead.
The average conversion rate of first to second meetings globally is 1 in 7.
1 in 7. Okay, that's a great statistic. And that makes sense to me. It actually takes me back to my very first sales call. And I happened to get into sales pretty accidentally. I was a project manager at AT&T. They were offering early retirement. And so this gentleman had left the business. And my branch manager came to me and said, could you watch over the star module of customers until we could hire someone to do that? Right. Now that sounds glamorous because of the word star. I think in retrospect, that actually probably stood for small, troubled, and risky. I mean, I was going to these like office parks that are scary that you've seen in like horror films. And, you open the door and it's like the chairs that are kind of rickety. You sip the coffee. It tastes like varnish. It's probably been there for a week. So I go in for like my first sales call. I've done all this work, asking the customer questions and, looking up their customer service history and what they've purchased before. So I go in, I'm wearing a suit I can barely afford and all the confidence I can muster, right? So I go in the waiting room, they call me back, sit down in those squeaky conference room chairs that are totally unstable. And I pull out my folder and open it and hand each one of these people my printed proposal, cleverly downloaded from the intranet, the fill in the blank, beautiful work of genius. Didn't even have any slides or anything, just the beautiful printed thing. And then I read it to them. Like I read it, like page 1. And you know how much boilerplate language would be in a template I downloaded from the intranet at a big company. Amazingly, I made that sale. How in the world? I mean, literally looking back on it, I cringe. If I could find these people and apologize, I want to be like, it turns out okay. I eventually learned something and get it together. They bought. You know why? I was so interested in doing the right things, right? Ask them questions, listen to the answers. I mean, the only part of that template that I did really well was the fill in the blank of what are the business problems they're trying to solve. And then like, how was our solution a fit? That was the point. They felt that I heard the challenge that they had, and they believed that the solution would help them solve it. I mean, the rest was rubbish. But, what I found was it took years into my sales career when I started losing more deals to realize I wasn't doing that listening activity as well anymore because it all felt like I had heard it before. Like, oh, yeah. Operational efficiency, productivity, new product, easier to do business, new feature, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
You sounded like your economics professor.
Exactly. Supply and demand. And what I found, I mean, these very high performing organizations that do well with voice of the customer, they really listen and lead with a beginner's mind. I mean, it's like every conversation, even the most senior executive can forget everything they think they know so they can hear it for the first time. And that's a discipline. I mean, it's easy to say and hard to do. But I think when you just get numb to these numbers that you see all the time and the stories you hear, you miss out on the real opportunities that can differentiate you and help you connect and add value to customers.
Right. I've got 3 questions that came to mind all at once. I'm going to try not to let my spaghetti brain get in the way. I'm going to combine them. The voice of the customer, I think we also need to build in the voice of the employee, and we need to build in a program for the voice of the partner. Increasingly, I think vendors are going to become more marginalized because certainly within tech, the stack is becoming so complex that they want one or two throats to choke. If we're looking at security, that could be 12 to 20 different vendors. If we're looking at sales enablement, I don't know how many that is, but we're talking about a big chunk, to 10 to 15, MarTech, all of those. And I think increasingly, if you are not very partner-centric, which means that you have to establish clear ground rules and expectations and a cadence of communication and accountability up front, and you have to listen to what your partners are telling you, then you're going to be in deep, deep trouble. And it's the same thing with employees. When we look at what's happened with COVID, I think I read in your book, but I've seen it elsewhere, 74% of CFOs are now thinking seriously about how they're going to have people work from home. There's a 230% increase in use of the telephone, 176% increase in use of CRM, 100% increase in production in some cases, certainly 40% isn't uncommon. And if we're not listening to our people, if we're not listening to our partners, and we're not listening to our customers, then chances are we're going to make some awful decisions that will leave us at a massive competitive disadvantage. So what advice would you give to people who are thinking, well, we already know best, we know what we need to do?
Two things come to mind. The first one is, anytime there is someone sitting between you and your end customer, upon whom the success of your business and your customer's experience depends, you must listen to them at a deep level. And what people often miss out on is you can have fantastic initiatives that are going to make things easier for your customers to do business with you or for your company. And all that happens is you offload a bunch of really unprofitable, unglamorous work to that partner that's sitting between you and the customer. It, hampers their cash flow. It prompts them to want to rep other manufacturers. And when I interviewed people for the Listen Up book who are CEOs and senior leaders at big channel partner organizations, I asked them, I said, if you could only give one message to people who are at the companies, right, that you're aligned with, what would it be? And they said, understand how we make money and how we provide value in a way that's differentiated from what you're in a position to provide. And I thought that was so insightful. I mean, I've worked with channels organizations for a big portion of my career, and it's interesting how few people truly understand that business model and still show up and do the quarter end game. Like, yes, for 2.5 months of each quarter, we have a strategic relationship based on shared value where we go out and find customers and win together. And for 2 weeks of the quarter are like, get that deal in, right? Cut your margins so we can close it by the end of the quarter. That does not feel like listening to your partners. Take that one step further. I think the third leg of the stool is, customers, partners, employees. And when you put that together, you have a very complete picture of your business. And you mentioned the working from home book. And in the course of doing the research and interviews for that book, I interviewed the senior vice president of global customer services for Palo Alto Networks. So picture a company that does information security. Well, what happens when companies simultaneously have to send all of their employees to work from home? Companies want to keep their employees safe and the information that might never have traveled to their home before, safe as well. So they experienced this phenomenon that their call volume went up 400%. 400% increase in call volume at the same time that there's a global pandemic and they have to send all of their employees home to work. And by the way, also locate their professional services employees who are out on customer sites and figure out where they are and how to get them home. Well, what was amazing is their customer satisfaction scores went through the roof. And so it would be very tempting in the C-suite conversation of how are we doing to say, my team is doing fantastic and customers have never been happier. And Patty Hatter, who leads this group and is in that role, had the very brilliant insight that it's great that the SAT scores went up and it's great that they were helping customers. However, the call volume was staying at that level and they had not added a single employee. And yet their employees had taken on all the stress of homeschooling their children and you can't find things at the supermarket and such. And her question that she asked, and this just stuck with me, is the way our employees are operating sustainable? Now, fortunately, they had started already kind of a voice of employees survey. And, they already had some themes, but they asked more questions. And they were even starting to encourage their employees, take a day off and step away. Well, like most people, when there is a lot of uncertainty in the outlook, they're like, I'm not taking a day away. I can't afford to lose my job. Right. So I think that there's this mismatch there, and listening is what helps bridge that gap that says the numbers at the top level look great. I mean, we're selling a lot, we're getting a lot of calls, and we're doing great handling them. The reality is, can your employees work at that pace in a sustainable way? And, something that was a big breakthrough for them, and I'm seeing other companies do this as well, is all of those digital transformation strategies and aspects of your business that you were planning to automate. Automation is a tool to help offload your overworked employees. The sunlight shines through the cracks of all these wonderful digital engagement strategies when they get put to the test in this way. And what they discovered was, wow, I mean, there are some things we could probably do to offload some cases or get things solved another way, because we have to offload these people so that they can be well and continue to serve our customers at an incredibly high level. So it wasn't an either or. It's not we pick our customers or our employees. It was, this all has to come together, and we have to look for the intersection of what people really need right now.
So this then brings me to the next obvious question. Why is listening not an integral part of ongoing training for both sales, well, for everyone in the company, but especially for salespeople and particularly for managers?
What that makes me think of, I'm so fortunate that Jeffrey Moore, the fantastic thought leader and very successful author of Crossing the Chasm and Zone to Win and others, wrote the foreword for the book, Listen Up. And the way that he framed it, I love this, was listening poses a lifelong challenge. Just ask anyone who has a spouse. And I thought, isn't that just interesting? Because really what we're trying to say is our human nature is to default to, I've seen this experience, I've had it, I already know the answer, I don't need to ask, or to fill in with assumptions. And I think, we get sort of trained that the further we go in our career, like the more experience or tenure you have in your role or the higher your title, the more you must already know. Well, believing that you already know is the enemy of believing that you need to ask questions and listen to the answers. And so, as I thought about that, I mean, it could be lifelong friendships as well. It's that challenge of coming back to ask a question, don't fill it in with my own story that's based on experience or a context that might not be relevant right now or to this particular situation.
I think one of the most important lessons that I've learned, and I'm definitely teaching my clients, is once the customer has finished speaking, shut up. Just give 3 or 4 seconds, and you'd be amazed at just how much value then comes after that silence. And actually listen to what they've said. Don't make judgments and don't hear what you want to hear. But so few salespeople do that. And so, again, coaching is actually an act of listening in the main. You ask a question and then you listen. And what's I still struggle to understand is the evidence is so clear. We know that people who coach 3 to 3.5 hours a month will get an average quota attainment of 105%. Those who don't will get an average quota attainment of 40 to 60%. And anyone who says, I don't have time to coach, basically saying, I'm not coaching, which is why I haven't got time to coach. It just strikes me as something that people are uncomfortable doing because they have to be vulnerable to coach, to listen to a customer and hear their concerns and their frustrations with your business and how you're serving them requires you to be vulnerable. And I don't think people really understand that vulnerability is a strength. It comes from the Latin vulnerabilis, which means to put yourself in harm's way, to make yourself woundable and do it anyway. It's an act of courage. So why is vulnerability so scarce?
I think, first of all, it's because it's uncomfortable. And the second piece is that it tends to take time. And something I think back on is in my sales leadership career, I mean, let's just think of that as being in middle management. I feel like I never worked so hard to have people think I was doing nothing, right? You've got senior executives that are like bearing down on you, like, what are you selling? What are you selling? What are you selling? Want to buy a watch, want to buy a watch. Then on the other side, you have employees that are needing help with escalations, special pricing, implementations that are going sideways, whatever that might look like. And I mean, how many times have we all sat in the seat and looked at that manager right above us and said, I mean, I could do their job. What are they really doing anyway? I'm the one doing all the work. And I mean, when I was in that middle management role, I mean, it's not that I didn't have the skills to be vulnerable in coaching. It was a challenge of feeling the pinch of having the time to do it effectively. And I think, whether it's customer listening, customer loyalty, quota attainment, or even candidly being successful at working from home over the longer term, I think middle managers are the ones that are in the forefront of that battleground of whether all of those initiatives and aspirations are successful or not. And I think,
absolutely.
yeah, I think we have to just be more purposeful about how we are training in and investing in that layer, and also getting crystal clear about what success looks like. Because is it being instantly responsive to the text from the exec, or is it unclogging the pipeline, or is it doing this vulnerable, engaging coaching that will take time to see results, but then ultimately puts you on a path to success?
Middle managers are in sales particularly, are in the most precarious role there is. We did a survey that we released in January, and 46% of companies claimed that they had some form of management training program. But the evidence from that research study suggests that only 13% of teams hit their quota last year. So I suspect that's going to drop this year quite dramatically. And only 6% of sales managers were fit for purpose, which means 94% are not. And the typical runway for moving from sales into management is not spending 6 to 18 months learning your craft, where you're interviewing, you're mentoring, you're coaching, you're having people shadow you, you're running sales meetings, you are involved in developing forecasts, you're helping to negotiate deals, you're going on ride-alongs with junior salespeople, you're having your work critiqued, and you're using tools like Gong and Refract and Chorus to coach yourself and coach other people. And instead, it's, well, Karen, your boss has just been fired. You're now the manager. Congratulations. And they only get, I think it's the 3 or 5% of the global training budget spent on sales. I think, is it 3 billion a year is spent on sales training? It's a chunk. And they only get 3% of that. Now, these are the people who are ultimately responsible for making sure and helping the team is successful. What's it going to take for leaders to listen and actually hear that managers are gasping for breath and desperately need help?
It's to understand how those middle managers are really feeling. And in doing the work from home research, I interviewed a thought leader named Seth Madison. And he's been doing this ongoing leadership study for years and has done it again now during the time of the pandemic. And what's interesting is the survey asks a lot of questions about what leaders value most, at different job levels of the organization. And so, you would expect things like belonging, right, to be high on the list, safety and security to be high on the list. And what he has discovered in the latest round of his research that's in the Working from Home book is that middle managers particularly, so that kind of senior manager, director sort of layer of people, their top 2 things that they're identifying with right now is feeling isolated and invisible. So if you think about it, right, I mean, there's this temptation to use as a way to fight that. I will be the middle manager that hangs on to every task so that I can show that I am adding value. Right? There is no more, I can be seen going into the boss's office and, hanging out with the right people. And, what's contributing to this isolation and feeling invisible is how distracted many senior leaders are when they're on these video calls like you and I are on right now. I believe truly if you want to connect with people, you really have to put effort into being present in those conversations before you ever get into the coaching or the being vulnerable. Distraction is the new dismissiveness. I mean, this thing, if right now, as you and I are having a conversation, you could tell I'm on my phone or doing something else, it's the equivalent of you going to your boss's office and they never look up from their laptop and they're like, yeah. Mm. Well, how connected am I going to feel to you? How receptive will I be to this training, right? If I feel like you're distracted and sort of dismissing me, and now I'm left to fight these fires alone. The piece that he discovered as he was studying some companies, by the way, is a couple of very smart companies are having teams kind of do some self-training where they'll take a group of people. So it might be middle managers, for example, from different parts of the business. And maybe once a week or once a month, they spend an hour together, and each person throughout the course of time, they rotate and do 5 to 10 minutes where the managers are training each other. Hey, here's the new way I've discovered to track the sales forecast or do the report or the ops review, or how to coach people more effectively or get better results or check in about what people need. So, some of these companies, they didn't roll out elaborate training programs. They tapped into help each other, will formalize you being able to share each other, and by extension, be a part of a community of people that you can reach out to, feel connected to, get help, not feel so isolated and invisible.
Very interesting. Look, we've come to the top of the hour. So tell me, what are you struggling with? What are you wrestling with at the moment?
I am wrestling with at the moment is just continuing to stay current and relevant. And I feel like everything is shifting so quickly, right? And whether that's connecting with customers, I mean, I can meet with a company and talk with them about how to better connect with their customers. And, 24 hours later, the whole world has shifted. So it's how do we stay connected in a meaningful way? And I think what does value look like in those customer connections right now, besides asking great questions and listening, but how can we just be available and how does that scale? And I think that's ultimately what I think about is how does that relevance scale to multiple customer conversations, multiple interactions as we go forward.
And what are you observing when you're asking those questions?
What I am observing is that it is helpful to break things down. I'm borrowing this from an organization called Tribe CX, but they introduced me to this concept and it resonated with me. They were thinking about it as do now, do next, do later. Because I think what's happening right now is everything feels urgent and everything feels important. And so when everything feels urgent and everything feels important, you can get into overwhelm very quickly. And as opposed to looking at the horizon as an expansive set of opportunities and options, it starts to narrow in to this single point, like I must do everything right now and I must find the perfect one path forward that sends me into that narrow point of light. And that's really a difficult place to be. And so in that do now, do next, do later framework, and in fact, I've done this with a couple of sales teams, is take your sales pitch and break it down to one slide for your customer that says, if we only do one thing together right now to help alleviate your pain, it would be this. Help your customers see the path forward by taking the smallest steps possible. And I think the other one too, is I spend a lot of time working with organizations and individuals on trying to combat this chaos feeling, right? The calendar chaos, the to-do list chaos. And so kind of my 3 questions that I repeat them to myself, but I try to share them with other people as well, that I think are really powerful when you get stuck in that I must do every task. I must do every task right now. I must take every meeting, listen to every podcast, do all of the things. 3 questions. So 1, does it have to be? Does it have to be me? And then does it have to be me right now? I did have someone modify it. It was great, which was with regard to meetings, does it have to be on video? Right? So give yourself some breathing room to vary what's happening. We cannot solve our way out of the crises that we're all facing by being in a constant state of motion. It's just not possible. And you have to step back and I think just ask those 3 questions and really think on what matters most and assess if you're spending your time on that.
very interesting. I've learned in my dotage that what I say no to matters more than what I say yes to. And that learning how to be ruthless in excluding and deprioritizing the stuff that is not important and focus on particularly the important but not urgent stuff, which means that I stole this from Mike Michalowicz, actually. Take a page, turn it into quadrants, and put do, decide, delegate, and design, and work out what balance of your time should be spent in each of those quadrants. And the higher you go up the organizational chain of command, the less doing you should be doing and the more designing, the more delegating, because you should surround yourself with people you trust to make those decisions and then empower them for making those to make those decisions, and don't punish them when they make mistakes. In fact, let them make mistakes. Just don't let the business fail, and delegate the stuff that you don't need to, so you can start training up the next generation, so you can work yourself towards redundancy. And I think so few leaders who are narcissists and who have a sense of entitlement can do that. And those are the ones who you see crumbling and making some really bad decisions under stress. So tell me this, what are you reading, watching, listening to at the moment that you really rate and it's having a significant influence on you?
So I am reading right now a book called The Cooking Gene, which is all about the link between food history and essentially racial equality and justice. So I'm investing in some learning in that way. On a business book front, The Customer Success Economy by Nick Mehta, who's the CEO of a business called Gainsight. Brilliant about thought leadership and customer success. But so his fundamental premise is you have to reevaluate how every aspect of your business is changing and needs to be reevaluated. So I feel like that's very timely as well. And then in addition to that, I have to be honest, I'm not a big TV watcher. I have started going back through some of those old Anthony Bourdain episodes, because I feel like if I can't travel and really eat out to the same degree, I can watch someone else who did it brilliantly and take these little miniature trips by way of viewership, I guess I would say.
Fabulous. So tell me this, you have a golden ticket and you could whisper in the ear of the idiot Karen, age 23. What choice bit of advice would you give her?
She had a lot to learn, by the way, and still does. The golden ticket that I would whisper in my 23-year-old ear is your life and your career are like a souffle. And the reality is you have all the right ingredients and you have mixed them properly and they're in the oven. Be patient. Don't open it too soon. The results will be there. It's going to turn out well, but all of these things take time. And, that's what I found. I mean, we're all learning. I mean, you can be investing in all the right things, whether that's a salesperson, as I was at that point, right? Calling on customers. I mean, you can be doing all the right behaviors and not getting the results you're dreaming of yet. You can be writing lots of blogs and dreaming of writing a book and you haven't gotten there yet. Dreaming of whatever, meeting an executive or getting that promotion or falling in love, whatever that might be. You can keep doing the right behaviors. It just takes time to get to that sort of delight moment when it comes out of the oven and you go, wow. I mean, I think about this year, a pandemic, and I have, 2 books coming to market in the next 4 months. I would never have believed that was possible. And, was anxious for those, kind of results and success, I think, as a lot of people are. But it all just takes time, aspects of your experiences and people that you meet for those to really come together in something that's beautiful and enjoyable. And then I think the key piece I'd probably add on is, and when the souffle comes out of the oven, take time to enjoy it. So this is not stand over the sink. We've all done this, right? With the spoon where you're like eating things. Okay, that was a meal. Not really.
Excellent. I was trying to remember the name of the lady who was doing a program that I'd strongly advise everyone to have a watch. It's on LinkedIn Learning, and it's called Confronting Bias and Thriving Across Our Differences by Vinay Myers. I don't know if you've come across that. It's fabulous.
I've heard of it. I'll have to put it on my list. for
Really
sure.
brilliant. So tell me, what are the book titles again? There's Listen Up.
There's Listen Up, How to Tune Into Customers and Turn Down the Noise.
And when's that due out?
That is coming out in October. And then Working from Home, Making the New Normal Work for You, which is coming out in August. And I already have a book as well that's in print called Success with Less, Releasing Obligations and Discovering Joy.
Fabulous. So Karen, how can people get hold of you?
You can find me on Twitter at Karen Manji. You can also find me on LinkedIn. And if you'd like to contact me via email, I'm just kmanja@salesforce.com.
Karen, thank you so much. This has been incredibly insightful. And I do hope that we can do this again.
I hope so too. And I can't believe how quiet the guys in the background were.
This is Marcus Cauchi signing off from the Scale Up and Hypergrowth podcast. If you've enjoyed this conversation, then please email me at marcuscauchi@me.com or mcauchi@sandler.com. And please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And if you think that you'd be a great guest, then please recommend them to me. Put us in touch through LinkedIn. Send us both an email. I'm always looking for outliers, people who will challenge thinking, particularly around psychology, management, sales, channel, and marketing. So do get in touch. In the meantime, stay safe. Happy selling. Bye-bye.